Hello? Is the mic on? Yeah? You're not hearing me? Are you hearing me? Yes, you're hearing me now. So welcome, everyone. It's so good to see so many of you here tonight. It was so good to meet students who I've been in Zoom classrooms with but have never met in person. So wonderful to see you tonight. So I'm Christina Sharpe, and I'm Professor and Canada Research Chair in Black Studies in the Humanities at York University. And it's my pleasure to welcome you this evening, both in person and online, for this celebratory launch of Andrea Davis's new book, Horizon, Sea, Sound, Caribbean and African Women's Cultural Critiques of Nation. We can give her a round of applause. That's more like it. Stand up, Andrea. No. I think you have to stand. So we begin with marking the violent histories of where we are, with making note of and reminding ourselves of the ongoing conflicts and contradictions of this land, this water, this air. This land is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas of the Credit River, and the nations of the Haudenosaunee. The meeting place of Toronto remains the home to Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. These Americas are built on violence and erasure, and we bring these histories with us. Those native to this land, Indigenous people from other territories, as well as white settlers by conquest, and those of us who have come here by force or otherwise as a result of slavery, colonialism, imperialism, and ongoing wars. When we enter any room, in person or virtually, we must bring these histories into view. It is with this knowledge that we meet here in the hopes of making and sustaining a different relation, something other than this world. With any event, and especially one as joyful as this one, there are many people to thank. At York University, thanks to the Faculty of Liberal Arts and Professional Studies, the Department of Humanities, and the Canada Research Chair in Black Studies in the Humanities. Thanks to Charmaine Lurch for her generous loan of 2 paintings. Thanks to Chef Boswell and Chalice Catering for food. Tiffany and Brittany and all of the staff at Artscape Witchwood Barnes who made this event possible. DJ Grumps, Mark Campbell, Charlie Petch for the live stream, Nupur Gojia for wine. Thanks to Anjula Gojia for all of her organizing work. Thanks as well to Another Story bookstore staff, Adjwa and Fataba. And thanks to the volunteers this evening, Shaughnessy Brown, Chevy Eugene, Aisha Campbell, Michelle Malubi Johnson, Clifton Grant, Kamala Love, Jamie Paul Taylor, Crystal Stennett, Shanice Felix. And now I will read the speakers' bios in the order in which they will speak. Dr. Andrea A. Davis is Associate Professor in the Department of Humanities at York University and academic convener of the 2023 Congress of the Humanities and Social Sciences to be held at York. She's very busy. Prior to this role, she was the Special Advisor on the Faculty of Liberal Arts and Professional Studies Anti-Black Racism Strategy. A former Canadian Commonwealth Scholar, Dr. Davis earned a BA in English and Spanish Literatures, first-class honors, from the University of the West Indies, Mona campus, and an MA and PhD in English at York University. Dr. Davis's research is rooted in anti-racist feminism and analyzes questions of race and gender through a focus on the literary and cultural productions of Black women. She is particularly interested in the intersections of the literatures of the Caribbean, the United States, and Canada, and her work encourages an intertextual, cross-cultural dialogue about Black women's experiences in diaspora. Dr. Davis established and coordinates the Black Canadian Studies Certificate at York and is an award-winning teacher, most recently receiving a 2021 3M National Teaching Fellowship. She holds cross appointments in the graduate programs in English, interdisciplinary studies, gender, feminist, and women's studies, and social and political thought. She is co-editor of the Journal of Canadian Studies, former chair of the Department of Humanities, and former academic colleague on the Council of Ontario Universities. Responding to Horizon is Eve Tuck, associate professor at OISE, University of Toronto. Tuck is Canada Research Chair of Indigenous Methodologies with Youth and Communities and directs the Toronto Circle Lab. Eve is Anonga and a member of the Aleut community of St. Paul Island, Alaska. Responding to C is Rinaldo Walcott, professor in the Women and Gender Studies Institute and former Canada Research Chair of Social Justice and Cultural Studies at the University of Toronto. Walcott is also a member of the graduate program in Cinema Studies in the Faculty of Arts and Science. His teaching and research are in the area of Black diaspora cultural studies and post-colonial studies, with an emphasis on questions of sexuality and gender. Walcott is the author or co-author of 6 books, most recently On Property, long listed for the Toronto Book Award, and The Long Emancipation, Moving Toward Black Freedom. Responding to Sound is Ola Mohammed, assistant professor of Black popular culture in the Humanities Department at York University. Her research is in the areas of Black studies, Black popular music, sound studies, and diaspora studies. Mohammed specializes in interdisciplinary research, exploring Black cultural production, Black social life, and Black being as sites of possibility. So I now invite Andrea to begin with a reading from Horizon Sea Sound, to be followed by Eve, Rinaldo, Ola, and then Andrea will read again, and then we will have a conversation. Andrea.
Oh my goodness. Can you hear me at the back? Wonderful. Thank you so much, Christina, Rinaldo, Eve, and Ola for engaging with my work and for joining me this evening. Thank you. Thanks to Angela. I just want to add that again for your incredible work in making this evening possible. A huge thanks and much gratitude to my family. My mother is here, my son should be here, and my niece, Shanice. To my many, many, many students who have come out to support me and celebrate this book, to my friends and colleagues, thank you so much. I want to offer one very special note of thanks and gratitude to Leslie Sanders, who is not able to be here in person. Is my friend, mentor, co-resistor, former supervisor. She has mentored and supervised so many of us in this room, and you know, the discipline, the field that we understand as Black Canadian literatures really would not be the same without her many interventions and her incredible decades of work. So I wanted to let her know, if she is watching, that she is here and we love her. Today, to start, I'm going to be reading excerpts from the preface to the book and the section of the introduction titled Horizon Sea Sound Toward a Future Now. As a Black Jamaican woman living in Canada, I am marked by the multiple and intersecting journeys that have culminated in my sojourn in a country where my presence in formal and popular narrations of the nation state is a mere afterthought. I began this project in 2017, the year in which Canada celebrated its 150th anniversary of Confederation, and shortly after the inauguration of Donald Trump as the 45th President of the United States. These were historical milestones that led me to careful self-reflection about my location in the North American nation-state. The questions I raise in this book thus begin from the place of the personal. Is it possible for a Black woman, or anyone for that matter, to live in Canada and participate ethically in the project of the capitalist, imperialist, patriarchal nation-state? And since the answer must be no, what are the possibilities for the articulation and creation of new affiliations of community for African diasporic peoples that exceed or challenge the oppressive construct of the hegemonic nation? As a post-1980s Caribbean immigrant, I recognize that I stand on the territory of indigenous peoples, shadowed by the blurred but persistent history of Black communities going back 300 years before my own arrival. I walk in humble knowledge of those who have gone before me. As someone unable to lay claim to any territory of her own, my project in this book is indeed not a quarrel about citizenship rights, but rather an exploration of what it means to belong or be in the world. I am a Black woman descended from Africans enslaved in the Americas, with no village of my own, either in Jamaica. I grew up in the city and my family did not belong to the land-owning class, or in West Africa, from which I am disconnected by hundreds of years of distorted memories. I therefore mark my place in the world through a series of displacements and disruptions. This is not to say that my presence here and in this moment does not matter. My multiple historical, geographical, and class locations as a Black woman born into the Jamaican working class and now teaching and researching in one of Canada's largest universities provide an important vantage point from which to view the world. This special site exceeds Du Bois's concept of double consciousness and relies on a polyvocal, intertextual, anti-racist, and feminist understanding of the world that accounts not only for the entangled routes and routes, the journeys here, there, and back of continental African and Caribbean women across history and memory, but also for our being in place. There is no doubt that being as a Black person in the third decade of the 21st century carries a particular sense of urgency, an urgency born out of danger and despair, but also hope, the kind of hope that emerges at the point of ultimate crisis, a social and cultural apocalypse one can avoid only through a relentless commitment to life. It is against this background of Canada's past and the shift in politicized context of our ongoing histories that I find myself searching for a theory of Black women's experiences that might help me both confront and supersede the escalating threat to Black life and the narrative of the benign Canadian nation-state. I articulate this theory through the tropes of the horizon, sea, and sound, which I use to initiate a conversation about what it might mean to live as Caribbean and African women in Canada with a consciousness of a shared place in the world. I offer these interrelated tropes as a framework of a diasporic poetics and cultural critique of the nation-state, to account for Black women's displaced bodies and multiple intersections, and to connect their memories and desires of a more hopeful future to the circulating stories of Caribbean and African peoples similarly dispersed across the world. I am interested in how these tropes might allow me to read the cultural productions of Caribbean and African women writers and artists as a narration of new possibilities beyond the political imperatives of the nation state and toward the realization of what I identify in this book as a future now. It was my desire for answers to questions about my own place in the world that led me to these tropes. I was searching for a way to account for my own journeys and the journeys of other African diasporic and Caribbean women in perpetual search of a place of our own. For African diasporic peoples, living demands a reckoning, not only with the past and the present, but also with the many places to which we are connected. It was near the end of my thinking through the ideas in this book that I discovered Charmaine Lurch's wire relief painting, Travelers. My ideas about the horizon, sea, and sound find deep resonance in this work. The cover image of my book, Travelers, is an unexpected gift of clarity. It reminds me that there is no one metaphor that can sum up the entirety and complexity of Black women's diasporic journeys and longings. I am arrested by the rich blue tones of Lurch's canvas, which collapse the boundaries between the horizon and sea and between the sea and land. Since sound travels through air and also through water, her painting also registers sound as a mode by which Black people remember the past and move through the world. By connecting her androgynous characters to the life-sustaining forces of water, air, and land, she gives them a way to walk through the world without being bound to any one discernible place. Since the one constant for diasporic Africans is the journey, she allows them to move through the world without being overcome by its weight or terror. If we are still moving, still speaking, still writing, still creating, then we are still alive. In Travelers, linear time also disappears. The past collapses into the present, which is also the future. Ultimately, the assurance of the future and of the future generations lies in the painting's powerful reassurance that we do not walk alone. People past and present are with us on this journey. Yes, the past shadows the present as a kind of haunting, but it does so also as a reminder that some of us have survived and others will survive still. The responsibility of survival, the practice of hope as a discipline, demands that we live with this awareness of our interdependence, that we walk in a spirit of humility, reciprocity, and mutuality. Thank you so much.
Good evening. Ivtak Esta Cooking. Can you hear me? So as an island person also a different kind of island person, my family is from St. Paul Island in Alaska. As an island person who has been thinking with recordings creation and recordings-based research, I have been patiently anticipating the sea and sound portions of Horizon Sea Sound. I am humbled to have the occasion to stay with the horizon for a moment. I should say that I love everything about this book, from the questions that it takes up to the other works that Davis engages, for its careful attention to self-same lands of Indigenous and Black communities, to the title itself, The title itself, Horizon, Sea, Sound, has the poetic internal breath rhythm of waters lapping at the shore. Horizon, sea, sound. Davis conceptualizes the trope of the horizon as one that both encapsulates and frustrates Caribbean and African women's demands for autonomous life, not as a delayed future possibility, but as a necessity to their being in the present. Davis goes on to say that she uses the trope of the horizon to register the hope and frustration of Black women in search of the seemingly unobtainable future now. The future now, as Davis writes throughout the pages of Horizon, Sea, Sound, is the phrasing that Davis has chosen to intervene on the always deferred future promise of diaspora living. It is a recognition of Black women's demands for an imagined future, at the same time as a present that they want to live in. Learning from Tina Camp's grammar of Black feminist futurity, future now, for Davis, is an agentic action, as in a glance that is a simultaneous looking towards hope and desire and reprieve, all the while knowing that it is temporary, making the glance toward a horizon an agentic action that knows that the horizon's promise is itself contradictory, both hope and despair, a mocking reminder of the limits, something fresh that opens up as one approaches it, only for it to recede as you try to cross the distance to reach it. In my rereading for this evening, I allowed myself to ease into the memories of the horizons that I have experienced. Of course, the horizon as a technical term for where the sky meets the earth or the waters in our visual field is always around us, even when we're not paying attention. So instead, I recall the times in which I have been in a place and have had an embodied sensation of being with the horizon, being in awe of a horizon. Driving in a rental car westward between Albuquerque and Las Vegas on Route 40, seeing a rainstorm perhaps 100 miles in the distance, so long away that it takes us more than an hour to finally reach it. The Verrazano Narrows Bridge between Brooklyn and Staten Island, so long that it curves along with the surface of the earth. At the edges of cliffs on St. Paul Island, where my family is from and lives, these cliffs are so windy from the Bering Sea that the last time that I was there, my children and I had to crawl on our knees to the edge because I was afraid that they would be blown off their feet. We got nowhere near the edge that time, though other times I would sit with my legs dangling down, just me and my thighs and my knees and the horizon. This one too with a curvature, this one too with many miles of water and sky in the distance, water and sky so near to one another in color that there was not a line but simply a meeting. Cliffs that allow us to look more westward than anywhere else in the so-called United States. Look so westward that it's actually probably south, and then also north if you were trying to keep one of your children from blowing away. How horizon, sea, sound come together here. Davis writes briefly alongside continental philosophers to attend to conceptualizations of the horizon, especially the contradiction of approaching but never reaching that these works identify. But then Davis importantly sets aside these philosophers to engage the ways that M. Norbesse Phillips, Zong, Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God, and then a close reading of Janet Sears' 1997 play Harlem Duet, and Essie Adagian's 2004 novel, The Second Life of Samuel Tyne, do more to make evident and disrupt hope and loss as repeating conditions of diaspora belonging. Davis writes that the characters in these later two works search for a trajectory that might take them to and across the final horizon of their freedom. Later, Davis refers to one of the characters in Second Life as, quote, still searching for a way to dream, an intervention on the trope of the horizon that is generative for how scholars in Indigenous studies and Black studies might think with that trope in their own works. I speak now as a reader of Black studies, of work in Black studies, but more as someone who makes work in Indigenous studies, to the phenomenal contribution that Davis's Horizon, Sea, Sound is poised to make in Indigenous studies. Davis does something so instructive here in inverting the trope of the horizon, not as a line with a curious contradiction as the French philosophers conceptualize, but as a contradiction with an agentic glance. Several times across the discussion, Davis makes reference to the closing paragraphs of Their Eyes Were Watching God, in which Janie goes up the stairs to her room, and quoting from the novel, she pulled in her horizon like a great fish net, pulled it from around the waist of the world and draped it over her shoulder. The horizon as a fish net, as a line that can be gathered up and draped over a shoulder. A fish net teeming with life and desire and despair has much potential for works in Indigenous studies that contest the lines, the grids, the boundaries, the claims, and the makings of empire and settler colonialism. Make a line something to gather and drape across a shoulder. Make a grid fishnet with, as Janie notices as she climbs the stairs, so much life in its meshes. Similarly, I look forward to the field of Indigenous studies engaging this work for its generous, steady, yet non-effusive attention to the significance of imagining radically altered joint futures and the interlocking justice projects of Black freedom and Indigenous futures. Engaging the collaborative work of Robin Maynard and Leanne Simpson and work by Tiffany Lethebig King, Davis's Future Now is an intervention on the trope of the horizon that again is both a demand for an imagined future and the kind of present that Black women want to live in. Davis reads Second Life in a way that emphasizes the refusals and subversive possibilities rendered in imagining Ama's indigeneity, one that is erased between the first and second editions of the book, to read for, quote, new affiliations of non-hierarchical community and Black and Indigenous solidarities. Davis's close reading of this aspect of the novel allows for a reading for mutual care, but also for complex and difficult consensual relationships that many readers in Indigenous studies will find compelling and instructive. I close by offering my deepest congratulations to Andrea Davis and add to that my profound gratitude for this work. It is one that I and many others will return to, like waters lapping at the shore, for many years to come.
The only thing I'm going to say is that for the font aesthetics in the house, I printed my comments off in Garamond. All our relations without boundaries. I think I learned the word cerulean from reading Dion Brand's A Map to the Door of No Return. I mean, I knew the word, but I really did not know the word. Brand writes, and I quote, all beginning in water, all ending in water. Turquoise, aquamarine, deep green, deep blue, ink blue, blue-black, cerulean water, end quote. If you know the Caribbean Sea, you know the word. It is that kind of thing. When Andrea Davis's Horizon, Sea, Sound, Caribbean and African Women's Cultural Critique of Nation arrived at my door, cerulean was the first word that rushed to my mind. The color of this book's cover and Charmaine Lurch's image, travelers, merge movement and sea in a deeply profound way. One's gaze and vision are immediately seized in some fashion. Davis, writing of her encounter with the traveler, states, quote, I am arrested by the rich blue tones of Lurch's canvas, which collapses the boundaries between the horizon and sea and between the sea and land. She continues, quote, in Travelers, linear time also disappears. The past collapses into the present, which is also the future, end quote. Davis then proceeds to take readers on a journey in which the trope of the sea, as she terms it, becomes a central motif of how we might think with and about Black women's cultural production, as such production necessarily encounters the insufficiencies of nation. In this critical tour de force of Black, Caribbean, Canadian, African, or should I just say Black diasporic feminist criticism, Andrea Davis leaves no stone unturned in staking out a claim for mutual relation. Indeed, it is clear that Davis' intellectual commitment to not only noticing, but nurturing and urging our relation is a critical deflation of nationalist politics of all sorts that one might demarcate as masculine in form and utterance, even if it is not always uttered by male-identified persons. The adroitness of this work is that Davis does not have to be as simple-minded as I am to name it so explicitly. I think about the sea quite a bit, and my encounter with Davis's trope of the sea alerted me to a certain kind of masculinity of thought in that thinking. Columbus really did mess everything up. Davis gives us another route to think the sea, and in her turn to Dion Brand, Ramaba Espinay, and Norbesi Phillip, among others, the trope of the sea is demasculinized. The Middle Passage and the Kalapani in Davis' analytical turn are not competing seas, but relational. And in noticing the relationality of these dreadful seas, Davis is able to return us and turn us to the archipelagic foundations of our being, what she terms the Amerindian, a pan-indigenous term. Stepping outside of the formal historical, Davis deploys Toni Morrison's rememory to turn us to the Amerindian and the African, not only as origin, but as more powerfully as future. This intellectual shift requires a different account of the sea, an account I had previously not been able to fully access until my encounter with Davis. Davis' work gives the relational a different theoretical depth and breadth. It is one in which a new itinerary of the sea is forged. First, in this remarkable work, the relational is not an accumulation of our differences stacked up next to each other, but rather a mapping of our cross-cultural resonances, as Wilson Harris might put it. In this way, the relational returns us from the bottom of the sea into a confrontation with being. Second, Davis's new itinerary has us navigate the sea, ocean, and waters, not in search of Shabim's woman, but rather into a matrilineal account of the sea, and thus our being. This is not merely a replacement of a masculinist account with that of a binary gendered correction, but rather a route towards, quote, a leap into imagination, as Davis tells us through a reading of Brand's At the Full and Change of the Moon. The place then of the diasporic imagination raises head powerfully in Davis's work. If one accepts that the sea is the birth of Blackness in the modern world, in particular a kind of diasporic Blackness that is rent from land, and that post-Columbus land is transformed into the foundation of the nation state, then Blackness immediately functions as a critique of the nation state. What might it mean to refuse the nation state altogether? What might it mean to plot a course of and for relation without boundaries? What might it mean to risk another account of relation in the ongoing aftermath of Columbus's terrors? How might the trope of the sea get us there? The Sargasso Sea is a part of the Atlantic Ocean that has no land boundary. All other bodies of water named as sea have a land boundary of some sort. Instead, the Sargasso Sea is bounded by 4 currents: the Gulf Stream west, the North Atlantic Current north, the Canary Current east, and the North Atlantic Equatorial Current south. and it is distinctive for its deep blue and exceptional clarity with underwater visibility. Davis has provided us a literary Sargasso, thought not trapped by boundaries, clearly articulated and argued, deep blue in the blues of our transshipped lives, and providing us an account of relational seas, Caribbean Sea, and Middle Passage, and Kalapani, without sentimentality or competition, as she turns to the Amerindian, not as past, but as the necessary re-encounter for a different imaginary of our relation. In the bottom of the seas, in this case, the Caribbean Sea, all our relations rest uneasy. But I give the last words to Junie DeSalle from her collection of poetry, Eat, Salt, Gaze at the Ocean, following Davis's profound theoretical, meditative, and pedagogical instruction to us. DeSalle's writing inhabits what Davis terms embodied sea memories, and DeSalle writes, "This is what the ocean did, lured with true promises of freedom even when there was no choice. Bury me in the ocean with my ancestors, cause they knew death was better than bondage. These are the number of bodies at the bottom of the ocean. There are no accurate numbers. We've swum in our ancestors' blood, salt, warm, vermilion bath." Thank you.
Can folks hear me okay? Yeah? Okay. So first, I'd like to thank Andrea for inviting me to be here, to be in conversation, thank you, Angela, with you and other academics whose work has inspired my own is exciting and nerve-wracking to follow, but here I am, and here we will go. Throughout the book, Davis invites the reader to consider and reconsider how we think about place. Davis begins the book from the place of the personal. As a Black Jamaican woman living in Canada, she is marked by the multiple and intersecting journeys that have culminated in her sojourn in a country where her presence in formal and popular narrations of the nation state is a mere afterthought. In meditating on Davis's book, I found myself reflecting on the idea of being a mere afterthought. Afterthought as a lack of consideration, afterthought as a lack of intention, afterthought as a lack of relation, and how, in reading Horizon Sea Sound, Davis invites us to instead sit, work, and decipher the ways in which Black, Indigenous, and diasporic peoples have always and continue to create practices that refuse the conditions of being a mere afterthought. Davis insists we consider what those practices do to reshape our understanding and relationship to place. More specifically, in the chapter titled Sounding Place, Davis engages the trope of sound to explore how Black women and girls' sound and sonic practices allow us to register this place, Toronto, differently. Davis draws our attention to how the diversity that is celebrated in North American cities is a reflection not of their exemption from, but rather of their deep implication in histories of conquest and continuing histories of Black and Indigenous dispossession. In order to be registered as progressive and even exceptional, an exceptional multicultural haven, what Davis's work adds to is a tuning into how the discourses of Toronto as a multicultural, accepting haven disguise the state's practices of management, containment, and enclosure that disproportionately affect Black and Indigenous peoples. I read in Davis's work the possibility of registering not only how the state uses management and containment as a strategy to prevent relation, which is coded as diversity and multiculturalism, but also how sound and sonic practices as materials that seep through those enclosures and build relation, because sound, while detectable and traceable, cannot be contained or wholly stopped, making its dissemination more fluid and its impact that much more powerful. And just as space is not neutral, neither are listening practices. This reading of sound and sonic practices, inability to be contained, and an instance on new listening practices draw from conversations in Black feminist thought, sound and popular music studies, and inform Davis's work to make audible how Black women and girls' sound and sonic practices in Toronto supersede the narrow patriarchal constructs of the hierarchical nuclear family and the imperialist and capitalist demands of the city and nation state to form Black feminist soundscapes that simultaneously unsettle popularly imagined and celebrated narratives of Toronto as an accepting and harmonious multicultural city, while providing alternative ways of being in relation with each other, as sound moves eminently faster, further, and more frequently than people do. It allows us to enter and re-enter the historical archive, to live in relationship to the past, and to imagine new livable futures. Davis's employment of Chapman's idea of disobedient listening and Mark V. Campbell's multicultural remix, among others that inform her concept of sound travel, which she defines as the ways in which we travel with and through music and its sonic registers, not only within and across borders, but also across history and time, upsetting in these multiple journeys claims of cultural authenticity and fixity and linear notions of time, and reconfiguring boundaries of national and personal affiliation, allows us to register Davis weaves back and forth like a DJ who cuts, mixes to sound, think, and journey through the reverberations of the collaborative indigenous and Black drumming beats that animate collective struggle in a Maikuda's We Can Do It. The inventive waves B-Girl and DJ bend the hanger wires to tune into the grooves on WBLK. For those of you who were here in the 90s, I'm sure you know that very well. And register the way in which register the power in Francine Valentine's Black girl voice as instances of how the frequencies of Black women's literature and cultural production have and continue to do the twinned work of scrutinizing these enclosures while reverberating life-sustaining practices of care, community, and the future now. Throughout Davis's close readings of Amai Kuda's We Can Do It, Motion and DJ Loquence's Oral Terrio, and Francine Valentine in Unarmed Verses, Davis's work allows me to register that Black women have always been the DJ. We do the work of inventing new ways of being, despite the everyday quotidian forces of brutal violence and enclosure. I consider Davis's attunement to the 1.5 and second generation Black women and girls sonic practices in Toronto an important intervention that amplifies that we can hear the whole world in a bent note, a throwaway lyric, a singular thread of the collective utterance. Davis's resounding of Black women and girls' polyvocal registers, how through listening and sonic acts of care, Black women and girls create dynamics of mutual relation. We breathe life into each other that make way for our future now. Her chapter on Sounding Place invites us to participate in the chorus Black women and girls make in Toronto, engaging us in a call and response relation to extend the power and reach of the chorus as sonic material that reverberates beyond all forms of enclosure. And so, in the spirit of working with sound and sonic practices, I want to end with referencing a Amai Kuda's We Can Do It song. So we too, collectively, can listen against the wrongs of settler colonialism, imperialism, and multicultural citizenship to create new languages and spaces of political possibility. Thank you.
Thank you all. I actually have a couple of words, and then I'm going to invite us to have a conversation, and then Andrea's going to read at the end. So I wanted to thank Andrea for the hard work of thinking and carrying Blackness, and the dream work, the desiring and the doing of dreaming a future now work of this book, and to thank my colleagues for their responses. So I ended the land acknowledgement with which I began with the following sentence. It is with this knowledge that we meet here in the hopes of making and sustaining a different relation, something other than the world. And Horizon Sea Sound is written with the hope and desire to sustain such a different relation, written, as Davis says, to analyze the work that Black women's fiction, music, poetry, and theater do as work toward, quote, living as though freedom is possible, and as, quote, a desire to live in reciprocal, non-hierarchical relationship, which Davis later names as the desire to, quote, live free without denying anyone else's right to life. And through attending to the tropes of horizon, sea, and sound, Davis examines the possibilities and impossibilities of Black life, and in particular about the ways in which the hegemonic nation state, supported by capitalist structures and hierarchical constructions of family life, denies Black women's right to dream. Each chapter of the book invites readers to rethink their relation to these terms. Each chapter begins or invokes Davis's particular embodied relation as that which opens out to a set of shared and or intersecting and relational stories that she labors to keep present. Middle Passage and Kalapani, ongoing Black and Indigenous deaths in the face of Canada's supposedly benevolent multiculturalism, the violence of gentrification, the mixing of and sounding of Black life and Black being. Horizon Sea Sound is a model for doing our work. It registers what it means to, quote, improvise in defiance of surveillance strategies of the state and to live otherwise, to listen against, to work animated by a shared future now in which we act and live guided by the principles of relationality and reciprocity, to insist that to live in the future now requires that Black women and girls refuse the violence of white supremacy, settler colonialism, and the forgetful nation. To live in the future now is not about arriving at some perfect final point, she writes, the final horizon of one's possibilities. Rather, it is the insistence that each configuration of the present remains livable and that life will continue, end quote. A beautifully pedagogical and theoretical text, Horizon Sea Sound is more evidence, as if we needed more evidence, of what a wonderful teacher and true co-worker and collaborator Andrea Davis is. As Eve Tuck's response points out, her readings and how she undertakes them model what she models in them, and what they do are deeply instructive. And I so love Andrea's reading of and with unarmed verses. And as I return to it, I encounter again the ways that this book keeps opening up. And when Ola Mohammed talks about Davis's attunement to the soundscapes, the sound architectures, past, present, and future now of Toronto, I hear all that Ola so beautifully encapsulates, and also a faint memory, a lingering reverb of a talk that I heard Gail Lewis give 2 years ago in a forum on abolitionist practices about Black feminist fugitivity, about aerials springing up all over London, and the history of Black pirate radio and the dissemination of Black music in the 1980s, how to sound and thereby be in the livable present, counter to our interdiction. When we arrive at Davis's postscript, we are in another space of reciprocal and lateral relation, one in which she takes us through, again, the tropes and introduces us to the names and the work, the interventions of the PhD students at York with whom she has had the pleasure and honor to work. She writes that she hopes that she has provided them with the rudiments of a language that they will nuance. She continues, quote, the questions that they are bringing to bear on this thing we call Black Canadian studies that is still writing itself. And I've returned often to a moment in an interview in the LA Review of Books with Roderick Ferguson, and I return to it as a reminder and as instruction in the face of all of the demands and the desires that we meet. Ferguson says, quote, I believe very strongly that we can turn our work to the good news. And here I say that I think this is what Davis, extending camp, means by the future now, and that doing so has a material effect. Lisa Lowe told me something years ago that I have always carried with me. She said, you know, the point isn't to be brilliant in the work. The point is to write something that somebody else can use. Andrea Davis has given us both the gift of a brilliant book and one that we can and will and must use. Can you all hear me without a microphone? No. I don't have any questions. because I thought that what we would have would be a set of conversations generated by the beautiful readings. But you're reading at the end. That's generated by the beautiful readings and engagements of everybody on the stage. So,
I mean, I just want to start by saying just how humbled I am, really, by your offerings of my work, your responses. Because all of you, I asked you to join me because you mean something to me and your work means something to me. I remember the first time we met was in that conference at U of T, and that was a moment that I'll never forget, right? I still carry that, and Rinaldo and I go so. Sorry, can't hear me? Sorry. I'm just saying that, just how moved and how grateful I am for each of my colleagues and friends who joined me today, writing this book. While I was chair of a department, but my friend Leslie Sanders says, that it was there, it kind of just fell out of me, but to see it out in the world and to see these responses is just so moving. So I wanted to start with that opening. Thank you, Christina, too.
I mean, I could come up with a question. Well, maybe I'll come to something that, rereading and sitting with the book. And I keep coming to a moment in the chapter on sound and it's a section on unarmed verses. And I so love your reading of the film and your sort of situating of yourself. And I guess I want to ask you about the image of you in which you appear in the background of the window that says "Save Me." And I want to ask you about, your writing of yourself into the text, not as a way to stay in yourself, but as that sort of mode of connecting your particular life and history to these sort of both, past, present, and future across geographies. And so I want to ask you about that mode of writing. And then I did want to ask specifically about that moment.
Yeah. So this is very much my practice. Even as a teacher, many of my students are here. I employ what I call embodied pedagogy. So I often begin with my own stories, a reflection of my own place in the world, as a way of helping me find a bridge to connect to others, right? To how others live and move and experience life. And the text that I use in each of the chapters. So when I started the book, I had a sense of some of the things that I knew I would use. Dion Brand's novel, The Full and Change of the Moon, in that section on sea, and Ramabai's novel. But I didn't know, for example, that I was going to use Janet Sears' Harlem Duet. So things came as the work was in process. And Unarmed Verses was one of those kind of gifts that I stumbled upon in that section on sound. And Unarmed Verses is this wonderful documentary film about the gentrification of a small multiracial community in the North York Bayview area. And I have a connection to that place. But again, that wasn't even deliberate, right? It was just part of that discovery. My hairdresser, who I had been going to for many, many years, lived in that community. It's Toronto housing community, and lost her son, and never recovered from that loss and from that grieving, and we lost touch. And so as I was writing that chapter, I felt I needed to go back to that place. I needed to see it, I needed to feel and experience it. And when I returned all of the townhouses were gone, and they had, started excavation and constructing, the new buildings, and there were all of these wonderful, pretty, swanky pictures of what the new site would look like. And so I wanted to record some of it. And it was only afterwards that I noticed that my picture was there. So, and it reminds me, of Toni Morrison's reflection in Beloved, of Setha's reflection that even when we leave 100 years, 50 years from now, when you go back to a place, you can erase it, you can demolish it, but those memories live there, they're still there, right? So there's this moment in the film when Francine, the main subject, buries a jar in her backyard. So even when her house is demolished and gone, that jar is there. And maybe they've excavated it, but still that thing is there, that knowing, that memory is there. And there's a way in which, as Black people, as afterthoughts, as tangential, however we might initially think of ourselves, we are part of this geography. And that's what I was trying to get at in that chapter on sound.
And
right?
you do it beautifully.
Thank you. We are part of the earth, the land, the grieving, the toiling together with indigenous peoples, with other racialized peoples, so, and that remains, and it's tangible. Resonates, yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. One more question? One more comment, question?
I was in awe of what everyone else said. I'm here to listen.
We don't have. So Andrea, would you like to read?
Sure, I can end with a reading, and I want to go to the end of the postscript which you referenced, Christina. This is how I've come to the end of writing this book. George Floyd's death galvanized an army and ushered in hope out of the ashes of death. It demanded a personal and collective reckoning. The pain was too deep to hold alone. It brought Black and Indigenous women and brown and white co-resistors together, searching for a way not to forget, but to survive our collective grief, guilt, and anger. And still, there will be more dying, more injury. Words have power, and sometimes they are not enough. As I turned to the protesters in the street for a sign that life will continue, I have also turned to 1.5 and second generation Canadians at the close of this book in search of hope, understanding of our times, and the courage to imagine a different future. But I have also written this book for them, so they know they're not alone in the hard work of living and thinking and imagining change. It is fitting that I close this postscript then with a homage to my own and other graduate students and emerging scholars writing in the field of Black Canadian studies. More than anything else, I hope I have provided them with a way to continue the labor of thinking Black women's and Black people's being in Canada and the Americas, with the rudiments of a language they will nuance in brilliant and spectacular ways to tell their own stories. I think here of the historical, literary, and artistic work in Black Canadian women's feminisms by Patrice Allen, Janice Anderson, and Shaughnessy Brown. The work on memory and Caribbean Indigenous futurities by Charlotte Hene. The work on sound by Ola Mohammed and Francesca D'Amico. Sam tackles examination of the complex Sam tackles examinations of the complex formations of Blackness in the West and Chevy Eugene's Caribbean diasporic interventions. These wonderful emerging voices, like the voices of B-Girl, DJ, Francine, and Amai Kuda, cannot be stopped. Their work may answer some of the questions I raise here, but even more important, they will bring new questions of their own to bear on this thing we call Black Canadian Studies that is still writing itself. I am in awe of what is to come. If I write something down, be sure that I make something of silence, says Canisia Lubrin in 53 Acts of Living. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Let's give it up for Andrea A. Davis and the launch of Horizon Sea and Sound. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you to Rinaldo, to Eve, to Ola, and of course, our most gracious host, Christina Sharpe. The night is not over. For many of us, this is our first time actually being out and partying in 2 years. Andrea, thank you for giving us a reason to come out and party. And I also just wanted to give a short congratulations to the many Black scholars who have published books over the last 2 years, whom we have not been able to celebrate in person. You've been on the virtual launches, we've been on the Zooms, and we've seen the books, but you know, for me as a bookseller, it's so special for us to gather in person. So thank you for that, and I want to acknowledge Rinaldo Walcott, who put out 2 books in the last 2 years. To Ronald Cummings for The Fire This Time, to Nelanie Mohibir, to Catherine McKittrick, to Chantel Gibson, to Ian Williams, to Habiba Cooper Diallo, to Carl James, to Funky Alajabidi, to Michelle Johnson, to the many scholars who we've not been able to toast. And Canisia, of course, Canisia Lubrin, whose book we have here. So a big congratulations to all these scholars. We hope to return to in-person events more and more. But tonight is being recorded. Thank you to Charlie Petch. We have a live recording on our YouTube page, so you can tell all your friends about it or watch it again. I want to say that we have a lot of music that's going to be played, so you have to put on your dancing shoes. We're going to clear off some of these chairs. Maybe you can help us. Don't break any glasses that are under your chairs. Put the glasses back in the cartons that are back there. And Chef Boswell, Chalice Catering, how grateful, how lucky are we to have a feast that is coming to you right behind me. He's got a lot of food that he's preparing. So come and stay, eat a lot of food. There is a feast coming your way, you can smell it. There are books for sale. Andrea will be signing at the back, but please stay, please dance. DJ Grumps, give it up for Mark Campbell and DJ Grumps. Put on your mask and party and drink some wine and have something to eat. So thank you again, Andrea Davis. Thank you. And thank you to Artscape Witchwood Barn. Stick around. Let's get the music going.